Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Dublin Tech Talks, brought to you in association with Icon Accounting. Delighted to be back on today's show. We're going to be continuing our product theme. We're speaking with Emma Mulholland, who's Principal Product Manager at Instil Software, based up in Belfast. She is also the founder of ProductTank Belfast, Product Camp Belfast, and organises a lot of lean coffees up in Belfast. She's a known thought leader within this space, and on this show we're going to be talking around her journey within product, empathy within product, which is she says one of the superpowers, and everything else that we could think about. So I hope you enjoy, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Now, so Emma, for joining us today on the podcast. It's great to see you.
Cool. Thank you very much for having me.
So I gave a little bit of a background in my introduction, but do you want to maybe tell people who you are and kind of what you've been up to and where you sit within the product world?
Sure. Cool. So like I said, my name's Emma Mulholland. I'm currently Principal Product Manager at Instil. So Instil's was traditionally a software consultancy in Belfast, and we're kind of moving ourselves to be more of a product practice, which is quite exciting. So I work with the design team, and we are starting to build in product management. So that's all cool. Within Belfast, I work or I run a couple of different product meetups. So we've got Lean Coffee, which runs monthly, and that covers product and agile and a load of other weird and wonderful things. It's just a talking shop where we get to talk about lots of cool things. And then there's also ProductTank Belfast, which I set up a few years ago. It's kind of running now quite happily with other people, but we got it up and running. And then finally, there's Product Camp Belfast, which we had 2 years running and then had a little hiatus last year when the world went mad, but we'll be coming back again this summer. So yeah, I've also done other things in Belfast, worked for a couple of other places, large and small. But prior to that, it's only been in the last, say, 5 years. Prior to that, I was based over in England and worked in e-commerce for about 10 years.
Brilliant.
That's covered.
Yeah, and there seems to be a real good appetite up in, if you're able to get 3 type meetups or kind of talk events, talk shops, as you say, up in Belfast. It's is it a growing environment up Belfast way, or kind of where does product sit within the environment there?
Yeah, for sure. It's a really exciting time for product in Belfast. So like I said, I came back to Belfast maybe 5 years ago, and I think when I first landed, I wasn't sure if I was even going to be staying in Ireland. I'd taken a gap year, my second gap year, indulgently, after working for 10 years in London, and I kind of ended up back here. And I had this decision point about whether to stay or, there was options to go to Canada and other places. And after a couple of months, there was no talk of product, there was no roles, there was nothing happening. And then there was this like really exciting opportunity in Allstate where they were creating this kind of product lab, this lean thinking, this like XP lab, very like Pivotal. They were partnering with Pivotal to set it up. And so I ended up staying with that. And from that beginning, where product wasn't really happening in Belfast at all, we set up ProductTank because we kind of had people starting to work in Allstate and working in this way. And I wanted to see if there was any other interest in Belfast. And I think the first time we ran, there was maybe 5 people in a pub. And for that first year, you'd kind of have a couple of people in a pub meeting and chatting. And then it's just grown and grown and grown over the last couple of years. And where we are now in Belfast is it's at a point where the role is understood. We've now got a pipeline of people coming through. So we have product managers, you can see more senior roles coming through. We've had the first couple of like head of product roles. We even had 1 or 2 CPO roles coming through in Belfast. And there's a real appetite for it. I think Belfast was kind of seen as an engineering hub, and quite often they'd be the offshore component to like big companies, a lot of American companies, etc. And their engineers were in Belfast, but a lot of the strategy and the product thinking would be in the home base. And that is now changing, and changing quite dramatically. They're kind of they're empowering the teams in Belfast. They're moving into kind of more agile ways of working. So they want product managers to be based with engineers, and they want them to have the authority and kind of empower them to make those decisions and to have some of that kind of that thinking happening. And it's just started to explode, which is why we've now got, there's actually, I think, over 1,000 people in ProductTank Belfast, kind of compared to like those, I don't know, like say 5 or 6 people that met in the pub that first night. It's like, it's just, you know, it's grown, it's grown enormously.
It's great to see for somewhere like Belfast that would, as you mentioned, been seen as maybe a low cost third-party environment or kind of ecosystem for a lot of a good few of the American multinationals. I was up at Belfast probably about 4 years ago, last time work-wise, and I was surprised at how vibrant the city was, and it seemed like a very young city, and I think that's kind of translated in a few of the businesses that are starting to do really, really well in Belfast, and a lot of the SaaS-based ecosystem that is there. So I'm guessing that has empowered a lot of the product thinking and people within the mindset of what is product, and that ecosystem of people talking to each other and founders becoming the new leaders within business.
Yeah, for sure. There's a really strong startup culture. There's a lot of investment, and there's a whole range of skills. So you kind of get this really nice heady mixture that's now happening. And there is a very, like you said, there's a vibrant feeling, and there's a lot of confidence as well in Belfast. And you start seeing it. You start seeing polls now that say that Belfast is one of the best places to live and work, and it's like a really strong tech hub. And I think it's still at that nice point where the quality of life and the cost of living, the quality of life is really high, and the cost of living is still fairly manageable. Do you know what I mean? You can afford to live there really easily, and the salaries are really nice. So, you know, and it's just a beautiful city to be in. So it's it's kind of, I was going to say, prefix that with before the pandemic, because the whole world's changed. But the strange thing is, even with the pandemic happening, there's still so much growth within the technology sector. Do you know what I mean? You still see all these like job openings and people moving between companies, and it's I think technology lends itself to remote working anyway, so I don't think it impacted particularly upon the city. It's, you know, there's still a lot of confidence there and vibrancy.
Same as Dublin. I was actually surprised when I thought things would die. It's as busy as ever, if not busier, and you know, companies are powering through, and it's great. You know, in watching it all, it's nearly like people just went, "Oh yeah, it's done. Let's move on." You know, we'll all work from home forever, and if we don't, we'll figure it out. You seem very passionate about product, and you know, the couple of times I spoke with you now, your personality probably lends a lot to that. You know, how did you migrate from where you were, say, on the business analyst side and move into product, or what was that personal evolution to see that you wanted to be more product focused?
Oh, sure. This is it's kind of a tragic tale. It's not a tragic tale, but it does just show, it's like day and night when you've worked in one way and then you work in another. But 2 different points in my life, I did these big, huge 3-year waterfall programs of work. And each time they were incredibly traumatic and stressful, and a lot of effort went into them. And then when they land, you know what I mean? It never quite lands as successfully as you expect. Or I'm going to be a bit cynical and not put into too many details, because, you know, it's seen as a success because it went live on a certain date. Do you know what I mean? And someone somewhere is making like a load of money. Someone's bonus was tied into that, and it's gone live, and woohoo. But if you are very customer oriented and you're using those metrics and you're getting that feedback, you know what I mean? You can quite quickly realize that if you've thought, I think that my customer wants this thing, and then they don't get it to 3 years later, and that assumption's wrong. Do you know what I mean? You can't build an entire like web platform, you know, and then just put it out there and it's going to be totally fine. So I just 2 different times I did that, and then both times we basically had to like optimize the platform quite quickly, or use that kind of understanding of the metrics and get that customer feedback and react very quickly to actually make it what people wanted it to be, or to make it, you know, competitive, or whatever it needed to be. 3 years since we planned to actually launch it.
Some live UAT was important, was it?
It's and I think once you've kind of worked that like one way, and then you work in that more agile way where you switch to like fortnightly or monthly releases, and you're very metrics driven, and you're doing like rapid prototyping and having like assumptions and experiments, and getting the chance to kind of validate things and get that feedback and get things like quickly. It's kind of you can't really go back. Do you know what I mean? It makes you hungry for that way of working, and it humbles you once you get used to testing things and running experiments and using this concept of validation as opposed to just, this is my baby, this is my idea, and it's totally right and it's going out there. It does humble you, and it makes you want to work that way, because you kind of want to get that feedback, and you want to test your ideas and get that confidence and have those little kind of pivots and work out where you're going through the data, as opposed to just some hippo's idea.
and that's great for you to discover that way. And with a lot of these things, it takes a while for people outside of the mindset that you might have for that to adapt or to embrace it, similar to remote working, similar mindsets of that, may I say. And how have you found the change of mindset of people that you're trying to influence in that world? Is that a harder part? Because you clearly bought into it and went, yeah, this is the way we need to release product. This is how we work. A lot of people might say that's just not the way we do it. How did you influence that, or how did you look at that as a challenge and overcome it?
It's specifically where I am now, or just generally, if you're just trying
general,
to chat to people and get people to change?
Yeah. Well, what have you seen maybe over, with the last 5 years, even in Belfast, with the evolution of product there? How have that ecosystem pushed on?
Yeah, there's a couple of times when you've seen real light bulb moments, or when they said there's that word humbled, when people are like, oh right, okay, so like it's not that obvious. Because something you'll find a lot, you're talking to a designer, you're talking to an engineer, and you're arguing over whether something should look like something or be a drop down or blah blah blah, and it all seems very obvious to each of you. It's like, well, obviously they want to do X and obviously they want to do Y, and then you test it and actually they didn't want to do either of those things. And do you know what I mean? It does kind of humble you, because it makes you realize that actually what you think's obvious, or your interpretation of the world, is not what everyone else's interpretation of the world is in any way, shape, or form. And so what I find is the easiest way to kind of start to influence people is to just get them into some kind of user testing, or let them run with their idea and be like, okay, cool, if you think that, dead on, let's prototype it, let's get some users in, let's see people use it, and let that drive it, as opposed to like have these big long programs. Hi.
Hi.
And then realize afterwards, get that feedback.
So
hello.
Hi.
Hi, Dawa, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm just going to press. There we go. We're joined now with Dawa Riley as well. So welcome to the show, Dawa.
Hi, thanks very much, Gavin. Nice to be here.
Do you want to just give everybody just a brief outline or update, or how would you say that? Give us a brief introduction. There we go. There's the words I was trying to find.
So I'm the head of product design at CleverCards. We're a fintech based in Dublin. Everybody's currently remote. So my background is fintech, consultancy, startups predominantly in the UK, such as Curve, Receipt Bank, and also large tech companies in the US. I've worked for Google as a consultant, Intel and Adobe, more recently at Booking.com in the travel sector, and helping companies with their digital transformation.
Well, it's great to have you. So we were just speaking there with Emma just about how she influences product thoughts and methodologies over time, and how Emma moved into product and the why reason, really. So do you want to continue there, Emma?
Sure. I think Dawa was actually going to start an interesting conversation around kind of people jumping into the solution space as opposed to understanding the problem space, because you're right, people are solution focused, and trying to push them back into falling in love with the problem is quite difficult at times.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? And also like convincing, like it's kind of, it's good to get going with things like the kind of new school of product management is definitely on the agile end of things rather than waterfall. I think everybody's kind of moved over to this, new way of working. When I say new, it's been around for 10 years, but there's still some folks stuck in the waterfall way. But it's like, how do you give product designers and product managers time to go and figure out what the real problems are and the user needs are, whilst the development team's scoping out the tech end of the problem space, and then bringing the two together? Because you can build like a very basic MVP which doesn't meet the user needs, but the problem with that is you can get stuck with it and you never kind of iterate beyond it. So the users start using it, you get metrics back that prove that it works as a solution that's generating revenue. So it's then shifting the mindset back to the original problems and doing more research. Like, that's challenging if you kind of go down the solutioning route too quickly, right?
Yeah, there's
what do you think about?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Do you know the whole double diamond thing, where you kind of, you do your problem-based discovery and your solutions-based discovery? I think I kind of like that. I guess where you're coming from though is if basically whoever's funding this work is trying to get the product and design people kicking off at the same time as the technology people, and then you don't have any runway to do your like investigations, and is that what you're saying? Because they're just trying to build before you've had a solid discovery period,
right? Because
I'm trying to get my head around that as well. As a consultancy, we're trying to, I guess, try and explain to clients the importance of that discovery period, because it's very hard to explain, because they don't get a tangible working piece of software necessarily for a couple of weeks worth of work. It's like, well, why am I giving you money? Just, because so trying to show the value of that research is difficult, but like you said, it is critical, because otherwise you could end up with a subpar product.
And is that an educational thing, and just nearly as I think that was, you said, people are used to doing it one way, and it's it's how people think about it and how they understand what new looks like, and they nearly have to be seen. Your influencing skills are so important in that side of your role, I'm guessing.
I think it's like a lot of companies, it's a speed to market. Like, they just want to get things out yesterday, right? So the agile approach achieves that very well. It's very suited to kind of modern times of rapidly discovering things, right? But then it has to compromise on fully understanding the problem space and the user needs. And it's like, how can you do that in tandem? Maybe it's just taking a snapshot of features or a scale back version and saying, is this adequate? Like, a lot of it is like discovering what is MVP, and what are the core needs that are going to be met by the first version, and then how would you scale it to either a wider audience or a bigger feature set? Like, how do you lock down MVP, Emma, with some of your clients? How do you arrive at MVP and justify those decisions of features that go into it?
So I'm fairly new to my current consultancy, but when I was working in Allstate, I kind of explained before, we had this internal lab, which is almost like an internal consultancy, and we would work in XP, and we would have these internal projects that where we would have versions of an MVP. But for us, it was locked down almost to a time box. So we'd kind of have, right, if we want to build something in 10 weeks or 12 weeks, and then you'd kind of have a product inception, where you'd spend time understanding, a couple of days building up your concept of your personas and a journey map, and then kind of journey map out your releases. And then if you t-shirt size them, and this actually, to go back to the very first question, how do you influence people to understand the theory? When you were working with business people who'd only ever done these big specs and given them over to their IT partners and not interacted with them for years, for them to be involved in that and understand it, and then actually get to shape everyone's understanding of the user, and to like give us a good understanding of that journey, and for us to push back on them for like not just to be proxy people, but to get actual real data to get that happening. Like, they love that. And then when you t-shirt sized out that journey, you could kind of all agree on what that MVP was going to be. So like what goal you were achieving, or what, what was the friction point you were fixing, or something. And everyone in the room was aligned to that, but it was based on a time box and t-shirt sizing. And then what was interesting was, after we kicked off, I remember we were in the second or third week, and the business partners had decided that they wanted to change the priorities. And because they'd understood how we built up that concept of what the MVP was, they could literally go, right, we want to take out this block of work and put in this block of work. And this is the reason we want to put it in. We think this is more valuable because, measurably, because it's this user value, or it's a greater risk, or I can't remember the specifics, but I just remember that was another one of those light bulb moments when I was like, this is the easiest conversation with a business partner I've ever had in my life. Because usually it's like increase scope and that's it. They're not increasing time or cost. It's just shoving more shit into that. Whereas this, they went, you know what? We get this. We get why you're doing it, and we get what you built out, and we kind of respect that. So actually, we're asking for a swap, and that was just beautiful. But
that's great.
But saying that, there wasn't as much of a discovery period as I would have liked. We went very dual track. So we had a product designer, and they were kind of prototyping and testing, but like you said, solution focused to like a sprint or two out. So it was that dual track development, but probably very light touch discovery on the solution, as opposed to, like you said, the deeper into the problem. So
I think one thing that I've learned as I go is the value of data, like data points, because you can't really argue with that. It's kind of not subjective. Like the more insights you have about users from looking at analytics and metrics, particularly when you get a business intelligence analyst involved, and you kind of are tracking product metrics or customer insight metrics, they become very powerful with convincing team members like developers or business folks that this is the right way to go. And even making business decisions, how can you tie that to metrics in terms of the product, right? And user behavior, and trying to get to those as quickly as possible, the data insights, because they're really powerful. I think the challenges are when you don't have all the data that you need to make the decisions, and there's gaps in your data, that becomes challenging as well. How will you find? Sorry, go ahead, Gavin.
Sorry, I was just on that, the data side of it, because there's lots of companies out there that probably like to think they're using their data in the right way, but it's, to drive those decisions. Without that, is that that is the influencing skills needed within product management to be able to say, this is going to be right, or when you don't actually have the goal of what the product is actually doing. It's, how do you communicate that? What's the best way of that? Is that building up the relationship with the stakeholder and really getting them to trust you, or what way do you go about it? Emma.
There you go. I think it's mostly around engagement and collaboration and alignment the whole way along. So you need a strong narrative, and you need to feel very strongly about your views. But typically, if you can bring the stakeholders along and come to that agreement together at each point, what's helpful for it is workshops solve everything. But no, it's like like if you've different canvases, there are so many different canvases, but even something basic like the lean canvas, where you get everyone in a room and you're like, okay, like, do we all agree who the user is, or what our objectives are, or like what the solution is? Or I think if you get people to input and align continuously, then that's helpful, as opposed to just presenting people with fake complaints and being like, that's it, because then they feel sometimes in the back foot, or like they don't have control over it, or they're disconnected from it. But if they've actually influenced it or understand it, then that's helpful.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that the more you can involve stakeholders and end clients in design decisions earlier on, and getting their feedback and input, so it becomes like a collaborative process, the more they buy into the final solution, because they feel ownership of it, as opposed to, here's the solution, now go and use it. And it's the same with users too, and user testing. The more they can be brought in early on with that and get their feedback and input, the more likely they are to want to use your product. And also the product's better because it's optimized for their actual needs and a use case. So definitely involving stakeholders and users early on in the process as much as possible. And this co-design collaboration is really important, I think.
And people that don't, products that haven't done that, would you say, can you identify them pretty quickly, of either when you're going in on site, Emma, and you've looked at previous projects, or you ones that you've used yourself over time and you went, okay, they really didn't listen to the customer here or listen to the users?
Yeah.
Is that pretty easy to identify?
I think it is. I think when you don't have enough knowledge of customers, it's reflected in things like customer service volumes. So you get a lot of customer service calls and you see patterns of where they ask the same questions repeatedly, and you're like, well, this is clearly a pain point that we're not solving via our current app or FAQs or web experience. So I think when you start to see patterns of user problems, it's quite powerful that this is a real problem that you have to fix, that was clearly overlooked in earlier versions.
And how do you go about that, Emma? Yeah, sorry, just on the user, how would you go about that? Sorry, bringing the user, looking on the user side. Yeah, sorry.
Getting them bought in to try to get feedback.
Just what Dawa was saying there. Sorry, just what continuation what Dawa was saying there.
Oh, so the metrics show that there's pain points or friction points or things aren't being used correctly. So how do you then get people into to remedy that? I'm not sure I actually understand the question.
I actually don't sure where my question went there either.
Emma was about to say something about
it was
just carry on.
Just something quite amusing. Well, maybe not amusing, but I've got the book there as well. Invisible Women. There's so many examples of things that have been designed that haven't considered women because they've been designed by men. Do you know, from things as simple as like cars, because test crash dummies were male dummies, that women are much more likely to die in a car crash. But I was just thinking, I remember seeing someone on Twitter that, like, was it Fitbit, or there was some technical product that allowed you to track your period, but actually didn't even have enough days in it or something. Like, there were some basic things that's like, I can't actually track this properly because obviously you haven't had a lot of feedback. You haven't had a woman design this. And this is like, a menstrual cycle is innately a female thing. So why you've got men trying to design for this? But I think it was just because they were trying to be like, oh, we need something to attract the women for this product. I don't know, let's be able to track this as well, but didn't actually put the thought into. So sometimes it's obvious, or even like phones that don't fit into women's hands, or I don't know.
That's true. It's like the product design fails, right? That's a product design fail Bible.
So yes, there's some very obvious ones.
Yeah.
But I think there was probably more of a serious question there. You were asking about how do you get user engagement or stakeholder engagement earlier? Was that it?
It was just kind of around, the engage. Yeah, my question more was around this. We've talked about bringing the stakeholder journey along, but as Dawa said there, you can notice when the users aren't happy, when there's high levels of volumes of calls, there's lack of engagement within, say, the web app, or people have dropped baskets within e-commerce. How do you bring that engagement along the line on the user side?
Well, I think that goes back to the discovery piece again. Like, it's all about understanding users. Like, it sounds so basic, but it's something that people just don't, for whatever reason. I think it's a time, money factor, or they don't see the value in it until you've sat with users. I have so much respect for them because users have all the answers, right? Like, they can tell you what's wrong with something that we wouldn't necessarily see, or even a CEO wouldn't see, but they can tell you immediately. It's kind of, comes out of use and familiarity with something, and who's more familiar with it than your end users, right? So everyone within a company should use the products. Like, it's like a very Google approach, I guess, about eating your own dog food. So I think that's probably the number one. But yeah, being familiar with the user's pain points, getting to know your customer service team very well, and having regular check-ins with them, looking at the data, getting business intelligence folks, speaking with users. Also, if you iterate on something, I think it's always good to start with kind of a benchmark metric of where the experience is at now, make a change to a UI and try to, before you make a change, have a hypothesis on what you expect to see would be different, so you can measure against your initial assumptions and metrics to then attribute that change to something. So you're not just kind of making things willy-nilly, that you can back up your design decisions and roll back if necessary. But I think, again, it comes back to data and data insights being really powerful now in product design.
Anything else on that, Emma?
I am. Could you tell us, like, at the beginning of a thought? No, I did have the beginning of a thought in line with this as well, which is assumptions mapping and trying to document all your assumptions to then be able to prove later if they're right or wrong. Do you know what I mean? I think, like you said at the very beginning, everything is an assumption, and you're basing so many decisions and things that are just assumptions, and then after a while you sometimes forget that what those assumptions were. Do you know what I mean? Like, because they've just become intrinsic knowledge, or what people think is the way of the world, but actually they may still only be assumptions. It sounds really obvious, but it generally isn't. A lot of the time, if you say I think this or I feel this, it shows that actually there isn't evidence. Do you know what I mean? You should be always tracking that and mapping them out, and then trying to understand how those assumptions are influencing decisions, or making sure that you can work out over time if they're right or wrong, and that after a while the assumptions then become your concrete base. Do you know, like you then begin to have like a true North Star, or whatever the word would be, because North Star is more like almost like an objective, but you almost have like a concrete skeleton of indisputable fact. Like you were talking about baseline metrics, you could get to a point where you have like solid assumptions as your evidence base has built up. You've got this knowledge base of all these experiments you've run, and you've started with these prototype, like these very early stage personas, but then after a while they become really solid after all these experiments and all these things. And so you can map out those assumptions and then start to have very concrete facts that will drive decisions.
It's true.
I think that would be good.
And what happens there?
You just don't often get to that point.
What would happen there if you have an assumption and it's proved completely wrong? So you're assuming that your product is going to be focused at X, and you've spent a decent chunk of your budget already going that direction, and then over time, through data and through listening to your users and all the tools that are there, that you have to pivot quickly to move and save what you're trying to do. Is that a common problem?
Well, I think that's when you have to go out and raise additional rounds of funding. So you're going to have to do a lot of work to correct it. It depends on how much work. Like, most things can be done iteratively. Like, I think it's important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because everything you previously didn't learn, you learned something that it was wrong, right? So that's a valuable insight in and of itself. And I think it is being, like Emma said, like tracking your initial assumptions, being like willing to question them, look at them critically, and continually like seeking to improve in product, and being willing to do that. Because I think being so stuck with your ideas as being right is a bigger danger than being willing to say, no, that was completely wrong, now let's change our approach and tack here. Because I think a lot of it is emergent, like it's an emergent process, product design. So you learn from doing it, you learn almost from your mistakes. So like that's the beauty, I think, of the modern approach to it. So like post, waterfall, the more kind of recent experiment, data-driven type product design is you can change very quickly, because a new insight might come out of your research, and you may discover something unexpected. Like a lot of inventions came out of random experiments and discoveries, right, that you wouldn't even known there was a use case for a particular product, but it came out of an accident. Like a lot of scientific discoveries were made that way. So I think the same can apply to product design. And then you go off on a completely different tangent, but I think it's it can be a challenge when you've already got a user base and you have to continue to meet their needs, but you want to iterate in a completely new direction. How do you grandfather over the existing user base smoothly into the new product? Like that in and of itself presents challenges. Have you ever encountered something like that, Emma, when you've radically been on a project that's changed direction? How do you handle that?
Yeah. I haven't, but do you know what came to mind? Oh, I'm not going to remember the name of it. Do you remember you used to check into things? Foursquare. Do you remember? And then they did that weird thing and they switched to Swarm, and then everyone just got confused for a while. And I think they had this product strategy where they wanted to become like, you know, like the Yellow Pages or whatever, like a product directory of like services or something, as well as a check-in. Do you know what I'm talking about? Or am I just rambling now? But I was one of those really sad people that used to check in everywhere I went. But also it just meant like slightly stalkery, especially when I was in London. Like you could walk out of the office and you'd see pings of like what bars your friends were at, and you could easily work out where to go that night. But and I had hundreds of different things I checked in at, and that product pivot kind of just killed the product for everyone. Do you know what I mean? Like it quite quickly people stopped using it. And I don't know why they did it. And I don't know, they split into two different things. It didn't make sense.
Yeah.
Really well branded. There was none of these two.
But it's kind of like sometimes improvements can kill the product. Like that's really interesting. I mean, MySpace is a prime example of that. Like they rebranded it and everyone missed the old school way of being able to create these funky pages and like old school design, you know, like they just, I know.
My emo-ness is coming out. Do you know when you had like, sorry, I laughed.
These old products.
Do you remember having this really serious conversation when Facebook first came out? Like, who the hell would ever use that? Like, it's exactly the same. It's not individual at all. You totally want to have like individual pages.
Yeah.
Like, how bloody wrong was that?
But I think the unique
or that's not for me, Facebook. That's for somebody a bit older because I'm too cool over here.
Yeah, but it's a big challenge for companies. Like, how do you pivot and completely change what customers are used to, even if it's not the best user experience, right? You can, like, I think that's why Facebook has stuck with its old design, even though it's not optimized entirely, because they don't want to make this massive change because they're worried about the drop off that might happen. Like Google managed to do that very successfully with their search engine, but it was very incremental and their UI is a lot more simple. But if you're going to pivot radically, even if you're delivering a better experience in your mindset, you might miss the whole point of why users are attracted to your project, like MySpace did. I mean, products are why they use it, what keeps them coming back. And I think you have to understand that fundamentally before you make these big pivots, because they may just vacate, especially if something better comes along as well. So it's a challenge to keep it relevant and sticky, I think, and also pivot. It's a massive challenge. I think it would be a good analysis to look at, why do products die? You know, like what you know, what was the reason? What was the design decision or product decision that teams made that just killed it off completely? Because there's a lot of learning in that too, right? Not to make those same mistakes with your product.
I don't know if I emailed people from Bebo and MySpace, they'd come back to me and answer that for me. They probably wouldn't want to say. They probably heads are still in the sand.
Yeah.
But I'm conscious of time, so we'll wrap it up on that. Why do products die? That could be our next talk. But no, thanks Mil for your time, Emma, especially on your half day. Get out and enjoy the sunshine. Dawa, great seeing you, and thanks for your contribution.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care. Have a good day. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye. I really hope you enjoyed that. That was Emma Mulholland and Dawa Riley. Really interesting talk around product, how we influence within that environment, the needs of the customer and the user, and how important that is into product. If you enjoyed that, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or on our social channels and our podcasts. A lot more to come in the product area, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks a million.